It's 2017, and you are a gamer on a budget. You want to buy an AMD card, as you know AMD cards have been better value, and you are not a fan of NVIDIA. The card you pick up is the RX 580 8GB. It's performance equivalent to the much more expensive 1066 gig for $70 less. Today, we'll be reviewing the RX 580 8GB, the budget-friendly VR GPU. For today's benchmarks, I will be pairing this RX 580 with my Ryzen 7 5800 X3D system to have the least amount of CPU bottlenecks possible. Before we get to the benchmarks, y'all need to know the specs about this GPU, of course. The RX 580 was AMD's fastest GPU at the time that didn't use HBM memory, and it really shows here. Based on GlobalFoundries' 14nm process, it wasn't as efficient as the 1066 gig, but it was pretty much just as fast. With 8GB of GDDR5 on a 256-bit memory bus, it is still rather useful in 2022. I would not recommend the 4GB variants though, as that is not quite enough VRAM for the performance that you get. It has 2,304 shading units on the Polaris GCN 4.0 architecture, which is quite a fair bit. The 185-watt TDP is a bit high for a mid-range card, but I don't ever see it draw quite that much power. The base clock of 1257 MHz and boost clock of 1340 MHz isn't crazy high, but IPC is always more important than straight up clock speed. Well, I think that's enough of the specs. Let's go ahead and see how it performs in games. Due to just how popular of a GPU the RX 580 was, and still is, I will be including more games than usual here in the benchmarks. The mix of games will include VR games, esports titles, indie titles, and AAA titles. However, something to note here before we get into the benchmarks is that after AMD driver 21.10.2, using AirLink with the Quest 2 results in horrible compression artifacts due to bandwidth limitations caused by the part of the driver that handles encoding being borked. Even after fiddling with Virtual Desktop, I got a far worse experience than native AirLink. So I am giving VR performance with modern drivers a fail here, as if you need to downgrade to a 1 or 2 year old driver just to have acceptable image quality in VR, then that is absolutely unacceptable. Moving on to more traditional games, we have Crossout, which ran great with 96 FPS on average, with really good lows at 63 FPS. BeamNG Drive also ran great at 73 FPS on average, driving around at high speed on West Coast USA with a bow line. Avorion also ran really good at 104 FPS on average, with lows staying pretty rock solid at 59 FPS. Cyberpunk 2077 ran absolutely fine as well, with 77 FPS on average, with lows that were surprisingly good at 40 FPS. No Man's Sky ran almost the same, with 74 FPS on average, but had worse lows at 29 FPS. Wreckfest ran very well with 71 FPS on average, with lows once again staying nice and high at 53 FPS. And the game stayed very nice and stable while I was playing. Repeating this odd trend, we have Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which ran at 72 FPS on average, with a very stable frame rate that did not fluctuate very much at all. Finally breaking the 70 FPS trend, we have Rocket League, which ran fantastic with 198 FPS on average, even as I was actually doing half decent at the game. Doom Eternal ran insanely good with 131 FPS on average, with really awesome lows at 86 FPS. And finally, we have the Halo Master Chief Collection, where I was playing Halo Combat Evolved, which may have been too light of a load, as I got 179 FPS on average, with ridiculously high lows at 131 FPS, with high settings to boot. Yep, I was not kidding when I said that I was giving all VR games I intended to test today a fail. Due to the amount of games I tested, there is a second set of results that will slide in shortly. It's such a shame, as the RX 580 hardware is actually really good, along with the recent DirectX 11 driver rewrite helping performance as much as it did. But when you waste 4 hours of my time trying to deal with the encoder being bugged, you're going to get a fail. Now that that is over with, I have some very important things to say about this card before ending the video. So, the RX 580. A great card for standard PC gaming, but the second you step foot out of that area, you are up a creek without a paddle. The bandwidth issues with Airlink is not the only driver issue I encountered either. Using NVIDIA cards, I can set my 1080p monitor to run at 165Hz, no problemo. But with the RX 580, I am limited to 150Hz for no apparent reason at all. It just will not let me set my refresh rate any higher than that. If y'all want me to retest the RX 580 under Linux, let me know, as I am well aware that there are open source drivers for AMD GPUs, and I bet that they are significantly better than the first party ones. At the end of the day, the RX 580 is only $15 cheaper than the GTX 1066 gig, while having virtually the same performance, just with far worse drivers. It is a real shame, honestly. If you play standard games and have absolutely zero intentions of ever playing in VR with a standalone style headset connected to your PC, I would still recommend the RX 580. However, if you are like me, who uses a Quest 2 for PC VR, it is just not an option to downgrade to over 1-year-old drivers just to get not horrendous image quality in VR. Well, that's it. If you wonderful people have enjoyed today's video, make sure to hit that like and subscribe buttons, as well as that bell button. I also have a Patreon where you can support me so I can continue making these videos well into the future. Anyways, DDT out.